Welcome to part 2 of my review of Dune 2021. Same deal as last time, we left off at the title card. So now right back in we go. Opening on this carries particular significance because the very first thing we're told about this world is that dreams are messages from the deep. And here we begin his story with him dreaming. If he even knows about this dreams are messages from the deep concept, he doesn't glean anything from it. He doesn't express understanding or realization about his dream. More than anything, he conveys a troubled puzzlement. But the fact that he thinks it means something, but just doesn't know what, implies he does believe dreams can have special meaning. And we don't know yet, one way or the other, if he knows this girl or not. This film has a deceptively simple but fantastically realistic way of seamlessly putting us in the shoes of the state of the character's experience of consciousness, and of depicting how a mind interprets and contextualizes tangible and abstract information. These are such great editing choices, where the sensory cues of his real environment overlap into the sensation of his dream, depicting his experience at the edge of sleep, glimpsing the dream and sensing the real world. And the distance of the sound of the raindrops makes them even more out of place. It sounds the same way it does to his physical ears, right there on the window in the room, not on the ground outside like his dream environment, which results in this odd sensory experience of a gentle but anachronistic pitter-patter of raindrops on a nearby window in a sunny desert. You might call it dreamlike. The story having that mechanism at its disposal affords it the opportunity to more densely, seamlessly convey information about the neurological experience of characters, which in a story that concerns what this one does, is indispensable. We learn eventually that this is a recurring dream for him, and that no, he doesn't know this girl. So, when he dreams about her, it's obviously when he's in bed in his room. And as we learn, it rains all the time here, so waking up to that pitter-patter on his window is a mainstay. And so what may result there is an inadvertent sensory association of familiarity with this girl. This mobile lamp shows us this world has levitation technology not just for ships like the one in the prologue, but all the way down to mundane things. Which does beg the question, for now, of if it's so widespread, why don't the spice harvesters from the prologue use this levitation tech, instead of being carried by a second vessel that also doesn't levitate? Alright, listen, Morningwood isn't an everyday guarantee, so narratively intact. And he gets right up as soon as he's awake. He doesn't lie in bed a while and fall back asleep for another 5 hours like a bum. When he's awake, it's time for him to do things. And this lamp is his only wake-up call. No alarm clock or anything else. Just a warm light to emulate the sun. Which seems to be part of a larger effort to maintain an evolutionary connection to an Earth-like ecosystem, to preserve their organic genetic integrity by not surrounding themselves with artificiality, as it'd be so easy when so technologically advanced. As we see throughout, these mobile lamps are the only artificial light sources in the entire residence. The castle is built to not want permanent light fixtures, allowing for mainly natural light, using only naturalistic lamps at night or to supplement the daylight. It's all stone and very woody, and it incorporates natural airflow as evidenced by the indoor wind chimes next to the windows, which are chiming, meaning there's no window panes. And the fact we never see any unshuttered windows in his room despite the streaking shadows of raindrops must mean his room has a windowed ceiling to more authentically expose the dweller to natural skylight. The year 10191, what? Not AD. It becomes more and more clear the further you go in the film, but it's prudent to talk about it all right now at once. This setting is a distant future of our real world. No AD means it's probably at least 10,000 ahead of our present day, assuming the length of time called a year is still the same. It's a future world with a future history that includes the history of our real world with some branching off date into a speculative science fictional future, as opposed to a secondary world, as Tolkien coined it.
Tolkien?
Like The Lord of the Rings. Rings, with no connection to our world. Even if it was only 8,000, that's still easily enough time for cultures and technology and even biology to have developed the state we see them here. But either way, the story has more than enough to show for the fact it's a future world with a future history containing humanity's Earth history origins. With full information now, most majorly we have the existence of humans. Yes, humans is evidence for it. It's a flaw in all the other stuff intending to be second worlds for there to be what are clearly humans. There's the use of the English language, there's the use of the Mandarin language, and it's the existence of the Mandarin language on top of the English we hear out of all the other things present that's the major meta confirmation it's not a second world. It's acknowledging in a meta, non-story way that the English and Mandarin we're hearing are literally English and Mandarin, the English and Mandarin languages from Earth in world, as opposed to the margin of interpretation that's used and abused in second world stuff like The Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or Game of Thrones, where the clearly English we hear is not the English language in world. It's for the creators and the audience's convenience, but to the detriment of the integrity of their setting. Human Beings does fully confirm it as a future world on its own, but English plus Mandarin meta confirms it. And there's plenty more evidence too. The faulty carryall is designated Alpha Zero and the crawler is Delta Ajax Niner, which means a history containing the Greek alphabet and Greek myths, and everything that necessitates. We got the existence of bulls, the existence of birds from the Atreides banner and signet, and you can hear chirping in the Atreides cemetery, the existence of rodents, evidently as an ancestor of the desert mouse. The Baron is eating poultry, so poultry. The existence of koi fish from the mural in the Arakeen bedroom, the implicit existence of dragonflies or damselflies, the existence of Earth-based plant life like date palms, and all of this real Earth plant life. The existence of marriage as a concept and a convention, mention of God as a biblical figure as opposed to just a turn of phrase like, oh my God.
The locals call the big one the hand of God.
God in heaven. God willing, they'll be able to find you.
Suggesting Christian or what used to be Christian religion. The use of contemporary Earth names, Paul, Jessica, Helen, Yue, Vladimir, Duncan, Idaho, the surname Idaho existing. Thufir Hawat mentions cement. There's ceremonial bagpipes. Dr. Kynes asks for coffee service. The Arrakis documentary refers to Terranic plants, denoting the plant's Earth origin. The Terra root word meaning Earth. There's the use and same meanings of compass directions, and the existence of measurement units of the meter, the foot, the degree Fahrenheit, the gram, the second, minute, hour, standard day, week, and year.
North and east of you.
We'll set down on the west.
Head south.
400 meters in length, 450 feet deep.
Holding at 167 degrees Fahrenheit.
Shield generators weigh 100 kilos each.
Prepare to be airborne in 30 seconds. Contact in 5 minutes.
You wouldn't survive 2 hours without one of these.
Every 25 standard days.
For 4 weeks, I live with the Fremen.
Been here 20 years.
You find some of that same stuff in second world stories too, and believe it or not, in that stuff, it's an example of thinness and or contradiction of world building, whereas future world stories have the luxury of being immune to that damage. In fact, their presence in a future world serves only to enrich the story, like with Earth languages. Our languages and their words are deeply connected to the history of our real world, so because its history is our history, it containing a language that has historical roots to our real world is not only not damage, it's more good world building. On the fundamental of this, world building and stories, everything within what's written by a person utilizes the pre-existing domain of information of physical, psychological, societal, historical, infrastructural, political, and technological structures and mechanisms from here in the real world, which gives this enormous head start, an unimpeachable and vast structural base of the story's setting. And that's going to be the case for virtually every story ever written, because they're all written by people who will automatically apply those underlying logics when writing, consciously or not. And that extends to filming too, where you're handed the easy W's of things like the world building of existence, like gravity, just by virtue of getting to film in existence for a story set in existence. And that's easy points adding to the merit of a story. Merit which can't and shouldn't be discounted just because they're gimmies. Nor can nor should failures of which be excused. Back to Dune though. Again, overt presentation of information to the viewer, is not good. It would be better if this didn't have to happen, but the way the film's structured, if it wasn't presented omnisciently like this, it'd be unclear whether or not this was maybe some different region of the same planet Arrakis we'd just been on. It's a sacrifice of a bit of the narrative quality in service to gains in other experiential aspects of the film. That said, it does establish its share of implicit world building. This is wonderful attention to detail of realism. There are 3 lightning strikes, each farther from the camera perspective than the last, and so the delay between each flash and its respective thunder is longer for each progressively farther away strike. And each successive thunder sound is more muffled by distance through the air. The first is a crackle, the last a rumble, only reaching us after the shot is cut away to the breakfast table, which makes an especially great L cut, because what carries over across the cut here is the final discrete sound the ear is waiting for, not just a fade out of a continuous noise that only stops because the scene stopped, and only made possible by correct depiction of a natural speed of sound delay.
It's good you're up, Birdie. Father wants you in full dress before the Emperor's herald arrives.
This makes his father sound like the man in charge of stuff, probably Caladan itself, given the location card naming House Atreides as its main inhabitant. And the fact that it's called House Atreides implies some degree of feudal fiefdom and of primogeniture. His father, her husband, isn't here for breakfast. Not unexpectedly, though, otherwise there'd be an unoccupied plate at the other head of the table. And there's not. It's a busy day. He's got a lot of business to attend to. After all, the Emperor's herald is coming today. The Emperor, as mentioned by the girl in the prologue, having taken Arrakis from the Harkonnens. At this point, it's unclear if the herald's visit concerns House Atreides specifically, or if House Atreides is merely in attendance to the visit. But either one speaks to the powerful status of House Atreides. Full dress further implies wealth and status, and her accent is not the same as his, meaning that for him to have developed it, his father probably has his same accent, not hers, which means she's probably not from around where her husband's from, which for primogenitorial rulership probably means arranged marriage or political marriage.
Full dress. Military?
Ceremonial.
He's more keen to embrace the military aspect of his position than the ceremonial, and it looks like there's a strong interconnection between House Atreides' royal leadership and military involvement.
Why do we have to go through all this when it's already been decided?
Ceremony?
This world, or the governing parties of this world, are attached to tradition and ceremony in official matters, even in matters of foregone conclusion, or the signing of a contract.
Thank you.
He's courteous, which obviously speaks to his upbringing. Also, the fact that he would thank her for pouring him a glass confirms by omission that she didn't make this breakfast, since if she had, he would have given the appropriate appreciation for that too, and he doesn't. So signs point to she didn't. So servants, more indication they're very wealthy. His breakfast is a lot chunkier than hers, which is good detail. She's a petite woman and he's a growing young man. And her drink, this being a future world, means in story that's probably just normal black tea or like iced coffee, not some fake wumbo drink. And nice competent directing that he puts his fork down and readies to be handed the glass. Though on the other hand, it's not devoid of continuity errors, like there, how his hand is back up on his fork on his first try, and then back down in the next shot. Yeah.
If you want it, make me give it to you. Use the voice.
With everything the story's shown us up to this point, to assume the voice is anything mystical would be absolutely ridiculous, since there's been zero indication, besides dreams or messages from the deep, that this world even has psychicness. So when she tells him to use the voice, the natural presumption can only be that the voice is nothing more than a method or mindset of speaking commandingly as a leader, or something to that effect, and that she just wants him to practice that important feature of the leadership role he'll eventually inherit from his father. And so when it turns out it's not just the commanding voice of a leader, instead a psychic voice that literally commands you in a trance, it makes for a nice little intra-scene no but yes type payoff when we learn that it is a commanding voice, but in fact a mind-controlling commanding voice. And eventually learn it's something inherited not from his father, but from his mother.
Mom, I just woke up.
It was already the leading theory, but this is confirmation she's his mother.
Give me the water.
His protest and half-assedness imply that using the voice requires effort and/or focus, and he's not in the mood.
The glass can't hear you command me.
This works great as a totally organic establishment of mechanics of the voice. He has to actually psychically connect to her mind, not just ambiently speak it. And it's such a little thing, but the amount of time it takes him to say it, and the way he looks like he's about to speak it for just a beat too long, and then still doesn't, followed by even more stillness, conveys that there's precise mental steps he has to go through to quiet his mind and gain a foothold inside her mind before he can command her. What a great choice it is to have it be that as we see him say it, we specifically don't hear his physical voice, even though as an outside observer you would hear his voice. Instead, we hear this preternatural power of the voice. And then several voices, at least one of which isn't his, impressing the command into her mind.
Give me the water.
But at least one of which is his, which would be her mind's struggling contextualization of his psychic voice. So why don't we hear his physical voice? Because obviously his physical voice saying, "Give me the water," did happen. And yet instead we hear only the parts of the voice that aren't actual audible noises. What that indicates is that what we're allowed to hear in that moment is what the victim experiences. And notably, we do still hear other physical sounds in the room, like the wind chimes. It's specifically his physical voice that's excluded from us, the victim's hearing. That signifies that the content of his words is not the command she receives. It's his intent carried by the voice. This is so brilliantly nuanced in the way it depicts the experience of the voice entrancing her, in what's best described as a third-person subjective point of view, third-person objective being the typical POV in film. The act is purposefully disjointed, not how the simple action of passing him a glass would regularly be shot. After she receives the command, we jarringly see her hand already moving the glass, dissociated from her person, the camera following the motion of her hand with a shallow focus on just the glass. And then we come back to her face again, looking as if she'd just been unconscious, now snapped back awake out of the trance, seeing that she did not, in fact, move the glass as she'd seen, but her hand is raised towards it. It's so impressively depicted and so unobtrusively that it's specifically, unequivocally, as if she'd dreamed doing it, snapped out of it, and then realized she'd actually begun to do it. When she sees the result, it's the same framing as her hallucination, the camera panning to follow her hand, but this time her hand is halted, only slightly outstretched, and the glass unmoved. And why am I praising this so highly? I mean, after all, third-person subjective isn't uncommon at all. It's done with soundtrack and sound all the time. Most cinematography is third-person, and a good chunk, in good stuff, is designed to accentuate and communicate the feelings of the character's inner experience. Subjective. So what gives? Well, it's not that its presence is better than those things' presence, it's that doing it seamlessly is, in a purely meta way, more impressive than doing those things seamlessly. Depicting, for lack of a better word, neurological experience from third person is very delicate and difficult to nail seamlessly, and this nails it seamlessly. What it does with that is further enforce that mechanically, commanding with the voice works by transmitting the intent of an action into the victim's mind. And to do that, he would have to formulate a mental motion of the action in his head before inserting it into hers. And that's part of why he takes so long to speak. And that's why her hallucination is disembodied and so hyper-focused on the glass and the motion of her hand. Because her dream is his imagining of the action now put into her head. And why her viewing of the result is the same way, because it's her mind specifically contextualizing it in comparison to her dream. This display on its own establishes a full outline of how the voice works. In full, commanding with the voice works by first concocting an intended action in his own mind, then it's implanting the dream of it into her mind via the voice, forcing the dream to supplant her conscious intent. The action obviously already in a cognitively compatible format, having come straight from another's mind. And so here she wakes up to having only started to do it because his dream didn't fully overpower her mind. But that implies what a fully successful use of the voice would be like to the victim while the dream is in control. It would feel like dreaming doing the thing and then waking up to having actually done it. And that is so organic, realistic, and thorough. It's so impressive. First of all, how basally coherent and consistent the underlying mechanism is. And secondly, how detailedly that mechanism is expounded by just this demonstration. There's no vagary whatsoever. And you get that expedient, detailed establishment of mechanisms all through phenomenal sound design, cinematography, and editing. Thanks to them, it didn't have to expend time having a character explain it, which never would have been as natural as this. In terms of where to file that greatness, you'd say it's great world building, densely exposited by a natural and expedient plot.
Almost.
Almost.
Bene Gesserit skills take years to learn, Paul.
His name is Paul. Bene Gesserit. We don't know what that is or means in any way yet. There's possibilities, but all we know for now is that the voice is a so-called Bene Gesserit skill, and that she's apparently an authority on Bene Gesserit skills. Her reaction to him having partially commanded her is surprised and impressed, so we can gather that this is the best Paul's ever done. He's never performed the voice successfully. And the fact that this primary display of Paul's use of the voice is framed around him obtaining water, when on Arrakis where he's going, water is a scarce commodity, sure is something. With full information, the voice in reference to Paul in that context is not just the Bene Gesserit skill, it's his voice as a prophet on Arrakis as the Lisan al-Gaib. And so in reference to the water, you know. As discussed, this is a future world with a future history that includes a roughly the same as real history version of Earth's civilization, which then diverges into this story's history. And because of that, the only reasonable conclusion that can be drawn is that the psychic system that exists in this world only came into use or was discovered to exist after this world's point of divergence from real history. Because if that psychic system had been in use whatsoever before that point, then the world never would have developed the same or anything similar to the way it did in our world, which this world purports to be a continuation of. So then there's the question of what makes this psychic system run and exist. Occam's razor, kinda. The fewer the number of independent causes, the more unified, right, the cause of custom setting aspects, the less contrived it is. And a less contrived premise is a more sensical premise, which is automatically what the story is granted, the benefit of the doubt. So, that being said, we must assume that any and all psychic activity is powered and facilitated by the deep. And the deep is what? The first presumption always is the best presumption, science, not magic. Failing real science, internal science, because more technically, any fictional science system is really a magic system, but inside the story's world, it's science. And fundamentally, a consistent magic system shouldn't functionally or principally be any different from a real science system. So with full information now, the most coherent and exhaustive answer is, the deep is an all-encompassing and penetrating cosmic field of neural net interactable, temporally omniscient information. A field which your mind, being a neural net, can readily interact through if you have the proper neurological configuration, like having a matching radio frequency, in the form of mundane brain structure caused by certain genes, not by having some nonsense like a psychic organ or a soul, just by having the type of neurology that this neural net interactable field is readily reactive to. Benefit of the doubt, the presumption that's the best written is science, also known as sense-making.
More dreams?
When Paul thinks to the topic of his dreams, the foremost image that comes to his mind is of the girl. To his mind, her overwhelming ubiquity in them makes her synonymous with his dreams. And we see clear enough in this glimpse that it's the girl from the prologue on Arrakis, and we still don't know if he knows her or not. And the fact that the insert does contain the noise of his recollection in addition to his current surroundings, it's representative of how deeply re-immersed in his recollection Paul is in that moment, and how readily he can re-immerse in it. And from that, it further informs the extent of Paul's inundation with dreams of her. If it had just been the visual of it, with untouched audio of his current setting, that would instead convey that it's merely his mind flitting to that memory and back again, which would imply different things, and the story would be different. When she asks about his dreams, there's a subtle change in her demeanor. Her inquiry is just a bit more intent than it should be. It's her imperfectly disguising her motivated interest as curious, compassionate interest. But Paul doesn't notice, not being naturally suspicious of her to begin with. And he lies. She has an interest in his dreams, and the fact she says more dreams means he's told her about his dreams in the past, but not this time, not this dream, because of embarrassment.
Extreme temperatures and treacherous weather events make life outside the cities of Arrakis truly hostile, with sandstorms powerful enough to cut through metal.
Big ol' exposition dump, but it gets off scot-free. This is not fourth wall breaking meta-narration. This is an in-world event that happens to be narration. So if it's internally contextualized as organically commencing in story, then it's not unnatural. And this is internally contextualized. It's a documentary. The information reaches us completely organically because Paul wants to learn about the planet which, as we'll come to learn, he'll be living on. And so he reads and watches documentaries about the place. That tells us about Paul. He seeks to be prepared and is very scholarly by his own volition. He went right to this immediately after breakfast. You can tell by the angle of the sunlight here. Very little time has passed. It's still soon after dawn. That's environmental storytelling.
Only the native tribes known as the Fremen have adapted well enough to survive.
Here we learn the Arrakis natives from the prologue are called Fremen, or at least are called Fremen by outside parties, like this documentary team. And we see the diagram Paul's reading about, and the way it's synced up with the documentary's narration implies this apparel is associated in some way with the Fremens adapting well enough to survive Arrakis' extreme temperatures and treacherous weather events. And up on the documentary's hologram, we see Arrakis has 2 moons, obviously not as close to the planet as shown in the diagram, but that's how celestial diagrams always are, because moons are really far away. Hologram projectors. You see them all the time in sci-fi. But could a thin air hologram like this really be achieved, or is this utter malarkey? Well, a version of the technology actually already exists. It's done by focusing a bunch of infrared laser beams at single points in the air to make those points of air ionize and emit their own light. But that existing method couldn't produce controllable color like we see here, and it'd probably make the room smell like bleach. And the reason you can't make a hologram by just having laser beams intersect and bounce off each other is because photons don't bounce, they just pass right through each other. A different thin air hologram method, which could conceivably, with super advanced enough hardware, fully result in this, is by using arrays of intersecting laser beams and electron beams. The photons can collide and bounce off the electrons in controlled and precise patterns, and that way you can control the colors too. So you can conceivably get what you see here. So the point is, a hologram like this is possible, so it's not bad writing. And if the technology and its manufacturing and safety became reliable enough, then it'd also make sense to actually use them in this way over a simple wall projector. So double not bad writing. And as for the look of this hologram, it's very good, as is seldom the case. It looks realistically like it's actually present in its environment. The way it looks conveys an understanding by the creators of what a hologram is. Besides obviously matching the scene's lighting, in projecting a picture, its dark areas correctly are transparent and in proper proportion. Because the projected picture being dark on a hologram just means there's no hologram in that spot, so you can see right through. And that's correct. What you see from a given optical point is the result of the combined average of the color and intensity of the light your eyes receive from there. The prime example for the intuition of that is a window pane. The light your eyes get from a pane of glass is the combination of light coming through from the other side and the light reflecting back at you from your side. The hologram is the same as the reflection. The higher the brightness of the reflected light, the easier it is to see the reflection, the harder it is to see through through the glass, because the input to your eyes is just the average of the two. And if the reflection is a lot brighter, it looks like a mirror, an opaque image. So in a hologram, like a window reflection, image darkness is synonymous with image transparency. And so the text is white for the greatest user legibility in a hologram medium.
Nice. Nice.
And here you can see the background is still slightly visible through even the brighter parts, the magnitude of which is proper for the brightness of its backdrop.
Nice. Nice. Nice.
Speaking of its surroundings, the room is not fully furnished, with these big wooden crates strewn about, indicating this house's contents are being moved elsewhere.
Preferring to inhabit the remotest regions of Arrakis, the Fremen share the deep desert with the giant sandworms, known to the Fremen as Shai Hulud.
The fact that the documentary would specifically note the terms the Fremen themselves use makes it now safe to say the Fremen do also call themselves the Fremen. And the fact that Paul is listening to what are the very basics of Arrakis indicates that though it's already been decided before the ceremony, that's still very recent information for Paul.
Long exposure to spice has given the tribe their characteristic blue eyes, the eyes of Ibad.
This answers our question from the prologue of why the Fremen's eyes are blue. It's not genetic, and it's nice that it doesn't follow some childish logic that the spice is orange, so the eyes should be orange. Because a chemical's color obviously doesn't transcend whatever state it's in. And biology is just a little more complex than orange equals orange. And we can also presume the spice doesn't just affect the eyeballs. And obviously the visuals that we're seeing are not the visuals the documentary is showing. The documentary is probably still on that picture of Arrakis and its moons. What we're seeing is where Paul's mind is going when he's hearing these things.
Little else is known of the Fremen, except that they are dangerous and unreliable.
So it's notable that the visual shown to us when the documentary narrator says dangerous and unreliable is of the girl.
Fremen attacks make spice harvesting extremely hazardous.
We also have the fact that this is most of everything the rest of the world knows about the Fremen. Besides some trivia, they're a mysterious and reclusive tribe native to Arrakis who attack spice harvesters. Although there's probably at least some amount more military intel on them than what this documentary would have access to. The Fremen attacks making spice harvesting extremely hazardous implies about spice harvesting that it's a frequent and standard practice in this civilization, a civilization which the Fremen seem to not tend to comply with or see themselves as a part of. And of course, if this extremely special substance of spice is naturally occurring, then to assume that it would happen to naturally exist on any other planet besides Arrakis would be astronomically absurd. So it should be presumed that Arrakis is the one and only place to get spice. Also, the text in Paul's book and on the hologram are written in non-English characters, despite them speaking English. So it looks like this world's English speech has remained roughly unchanged, but the written alphabet for English at least was at some point replaced or slowly changed over time. Also, whoops, he was already on that page.
For the Fremen, spice is the sacred hallucinogen, which preserves life and brings enormous health benefits.
With this and all that we learn throughout the film, what should be understood is that spice itself does not have any psychic properties to it whatsoever. It's just a chemical that affects your nervous system physically in the particular way that puts a part of your brain down to the same neurological state as whichever stage of sleep allows the deep to discernibly interact with the neural net that is your mind.
For the Imperium, spice is used by the navigators of the Spacing Guild to find safe paths between the stars.
The display of this vessel is aligned with the mention of the Spacing Guild to signal that the Spacing Guild is synonymous with these vessels. It's not named in the film, but to my knowledge, in the books it's called a highliner. Having it presented on screen in full when the subject of interstellar travel is presented conveys that the highliner is synonymous with interstellar travel in this world, and the equating of the highliner with the Spacing Guild conveys that interstellar travel in this world is synonymous with the Spacing Guild. And this must mean there was a highliner somewhere off screen back in this shot of the Harkonnen fleet that they must have been approaching.
Without spice, interstellar travel is impossible, making it by far the most valuable substance in the universe.
Its aesthetic has a biological aspect to it, making it look like the ship's coming out of the maw of some ghostly nautical organism, or some kind of long, worm-like creature, mayhaps? And they navigate the cosmos using spice. That's a big topic for next time. For now, thus concludes review of Dune Part 1, Part 2. Thank you so much for watching. Like and comment and share if you liked it, and subscribe for what I want to try to make monthly installments for a lot of months.